The plane lifted off the runway and then it just wouldn't climb. A few seconds later, it dropped almost straight down, barely 300 meters from the strip, right in front of the families who'd come to see their loved ones off. There were 11 people on board: the pilot, 5 instructors, and 5 students who'd come to make their very first parachute jump. Not one of them survived. It happened on the 28th of June, 2026, just outside Nancy in eastern France. The aircraft was a Pilatus PC-6, the reliable workhorse of skydiving clubs everywhere, and that day it was already on its 6th flight. What took away its ability to fly? Among the theories are a mechanical failure, an overload, freakish heat, or all of it at once. There's no official cause yet. But a few things are already clear. Sunday, the 28th of June, 2026, the northeast of France, the Grand Est region, the old province of Lorraine. At a small airfield called Nancy SA, sitting on the land of the commune of Tomblaine just outside Nancy, it's an ordinary flying morning at the local skydiving club. Around 11 o'clock, a light single-engine Pilatus PC-6 is being readied for another lift. This isn't a flight in the usual sense. Nobody's being carried from one city to another. The plane lifts skydivers so they can jump. That day, 11 people climb aboard: the pilot, 5 instructors, and 5 students. The students have come for what's called a baptême, a first introductory tandem jump strapped to an instructor. For most of them, this was meant to be a vivid memory they'd carry for the rest of their lives. The aircraft had been working since dawn. The day before, on Saturday, this very plane made 15 lifts. By Sunday morning, it had already gone up 5 more times. The flight ahead was its 6th of the day. For a jump plane, that pace is routine: take off, spiral up to altitude, drop the group, descend fast, and start all over again. For 3 days now, the region had been gripped by a brutal heat wave. The day before, thermometers in Nancy had hit 41 degrees. An orange weather alert had been declared, the highest level short of red. The air was scorching and dead still. Among the students that day was a group of nurses who'd decided to step out of an airplane into open sky for the first time in their lives. People whose whole profession is helping others had come for a taste of adrenaline and freedom. The plane taxis onto the runway. The pilot prepares for a takeoff he's done countless times. No one on the ground, no one in the cockpit knows yet that this machine is never coming back. The engine spools up to takeoff power. The turboprop Pilatus rolls down the strip and lifts off the ground. The first seconds look perfectly ordinary. Wheels up, the plane in the air, a normal spiraling climb just ahead. And then something goes wrong. According to the first investigative findings, right after liftoff, the plane starts drifting to the left. Not a smooth, planned turn toward the jump zone, but a strange, uncontrolled slide. It's as if some invisible force is dragging the machine sideways. You can see just how abnormal this is if you picture how a jump plane usually works. After takeoff, it doesn't haul itself steeply upward. It climbs gently in wide spiraling loops over the airfield to reach 3,000 or 4,000 meters in a single lift. The phase is smooth and unhurried. The pilot holds a shallow climb angle and calmly walks the heavily loaded machine upward. But here there's basically no climb at all. The plane is airborne, but it isn't going up. It hugs the ground, losing what little height it had managed to gain. Every second without altitude is a second stolen from the pilot, from any chance he had to fix anything. The people at the edge of the airfield notice something's off immediately. The sound of the engine, the angle of the plane, that strange bank. Even a non-expert reads it in a couple of seconds. Standing by the runway are the families of the people in that cockpit. They've come to cheer their loved ones on and film that first jump on their phones. What should have been a joyful takeoff turns before their eyes into something terrifying. The plane doesn't climb away the way it has hundreds of times before. It banks, drifts left, and presses lower and lower toward the ground under that scorching June sky. The slight bank grows into a steep left turn, and here the physics of flight becomes merciless. The plane has almost no altitude, just a few dozen meters above the ground. Its speed is low. It has only just lifted off and hasn't built up any momentum. That's exactly where the trap lies. Lift is created by the wing, with air flowing over it. When the plane banks and turns, part of that force goes sideways instead of straight up. To hold your altitude in a turn, you need more thrust and more speed. When there isn't enough, the wing stops holding the machine up and you get what aviation calls a stall. The plane sinks, losing its last few meters. Judging by the wreckage, it looks like that's exactly what happens over Tomblaine. A steep bank at low altitude and low speed leaves no margin at all. Between leaving the runway and losing control, only a handful of seconds go by, so few that the pilot physically has no time to find the cause and deal with it. Officials will later describe it carefully but unmistakably. France's Minister of the Interior, Laurent Nunez, will say the plane went down at the very moment it was, in his words, about to take off, that is, in the earliest, most vulnerable phase. The prefect of the Meurthe-et-Moselle department will report that after the failure, the machine fell almost vertically. That trajectory is an important detail. That's not how a plane falls when it's gently losing altitude. That's how a machine falls when it has lost controlled flight and tipped over. A stall in a turn looks exactly like that. And here is where the central fork in the investigation appears. Which came first? A mechanical failure that robbed the plane of thrust, or the maneuvering situation itself in which the machine stalled? Separating those two theories without analyzing the wreckage is nearly impossible. That's the job ahead for the investigators. The impact comes very close to the airfield. According to data from the scene, the plane goes down roughly 250 to 300 meters past the threshold of the runway. That's the distance it managed to cover in those few seconds of emergency flight before it crashed. The crash site is a bike path near Salvador Allende Street, in a lived-in neighborhood of the commune of Tomblaine. All around is an ordinary eastern suburb of Nancy. Homes, 2 roadways, a big supermarket nearby. By aviation standards, the plane went down in a densely populated area, just a few dozen meters from what could have turned one tragedy into 2. And here is the one terrible piece of luck in this whole day. The buildings stand close together, yet not a single person on the ground was hurt. The plane crashed onto a strip of greenery and a bike path, without hitting a single house, a single person, or a single passing car. Authorities will later stress it specifically. There were no casualties on the ground. In a dense city neighborhood, on a Sunday at noon, when people are out on the streets and in the shops, that borders on a miracle. Emergency services arrive within minutes. The airfield is right there, so firefighters and medics roll out almost at once. But there's no one left on board to save. The plane is destroyed, and because of the fuel, there's a risk of fire and explosion, so the rescuers work in dangerous conditions. The outcome becomes clear fast, and it leaves no room for hope. All 11 people who were on board are dead, not a single survivor. The pilot, 5 instructors, 5 students, a whole group of people who'd climbed into the sky on a clear summer morning, did not come back to Earth alive. In those few seconds between takeoff and impact, 11 lives were cut short at once. The most unbearable part of this story emerges when you learn who was standing at the edge of the airfield. A parachute jump is the kind of event you come to as a whole family. Relatives see the newcomer off, fret over them, get their phones ready to film the moment their loved one steps into the sky for the first time. That Sunday, at the Nancy Essie Strip, the families of the jumpers were there too, and they became witnesses to the disaster. Laurent Nunez will later confirm it directly. The victims' family members were on site and saw the plane go down. Before their eyes, joyful anticipation turned, in a matter of seconds, into the death of the people dearest to them. It's hard to imagine a heavier kind of grief. These people didn't get the terrible news by phone. They saw it all themselves, right then and there, unable to do a thing. For the human mind, a blow like that is devastating, and the authorities understand it at once. At the airfield and nearby, emergency psychological support is set up. Specialists are sent to the families, and care is arranged to accompany them. Help is needed not just by the relatives of the dead, but by the chance witnesses and by the rescuers who were first to reach the scene. Tomblaine's mayor, Hervé Ferrand, will later say that everyone needs support, both the families and the people who worked at the site of the tragedy. Ferrand speaks of the shock that gripped his entire town. A small commune where people know one another finds itself at the center of a national tragedy in a single day. At the town hall, they open a place of remembrance where residents bring flowers. Flags over the buildings are lowered to half-staff. Little Tom Blaine, which that very morning was living an ordinary Sunday life, sinks into mourning. You can see just how rare an event this is from the words of France's Transport Minister Philippe Tabarot. By his estimate, this is the deadliest skydiving plane crash in the country in roughly 30 years. For an entire industry, it's a blow unlike anything seen in a generation. The scale is confirmed by the cold numbers, too. 11 dead in a single light aircraft makes this the worst tragedy in the history of French general aviation. That term covers all of civil aviation except scheduled commercial flights and military operations, private planes, flying clubs, jump aircraft. France had never before seen a crash with this many victims in that segment. The news instantly spreads beyond the region. The crash near Nancy is covered by the leading outlets in France and around the world, from national television to international news agencies. Journalists pour toward the site, and government representatives arrive at the airfield. The tragedy goes from local to nationwide. The response follows quickly. Across the region, some festive events are canceled because it's unthinkable to celebrate in the days when 11 people are being buried. A period of mourning is declared. Tom Blaine's schools prepare to hold a minute of silence so that even the children can honor the memory of their fallen neighbors. But behind all the condolences and official statements stands a question that still has no answer. Why did this plane crash? Why did a reliable, repeatedly inspected machine climbing into the sky for the 6th time that day suddenly lose the ability to fly and fall to the ground? This won't be answered by politicians or journalists, but by specialists. And they start with the plane itself, what kind of machine it was, and what it was capable of. The Pilatus PC-6 turbo porter is an aircraft with an almost legendary reputation. A light Swiss plane that's been built since the late 1950s. It looks unremarkable. A high wing, fixed landing gear, an angular silhouette. But it's exactly that simplicity that made it one of the most respected working aircraft in the world. The heart of the machine is a Pratt & Whitney Canada turboprop engine of the PT-6A series. It's one of the most reliable and widespread aircraft engines in history, hauling people and cargo all over the world for decades. The propeller mounted on the turbine pulls the light airframe along confidently and powerfully. The PC-6's biggest asset is its short takeoff and landing, what aviators call by the acronym STOL. The plane can lift off and set down on tiny, unprepared strips, in the mountains, on ice, in the desert. It's been flown by polar explorers, the military, rescue crews, humanitarian missions. The machine forgave its pilots things other planes never would. For skydivers, the PC-6 became almost ideal. Its energetic climb quickly lifts a group to the right altitude. Its roomy cabin holds several jumpers at once. A big side door makes it easy to step out into the sky. No wonder parachute clubs all over the world have spent years flying these turbo porters. Around 300 of them are still in service today. The skydiving version has one feature worth knowing about. The jumpers sit in the cargo cabin not like ordinary passengers, but most often without separate seats, on the floor or along the sides, ready to stand up fast and step out. In a normal jump, that makes sense. But in a crash on takeoff, that layout leaves people with no chance of protection, and still the type itself is flawless. So the question shifts away from the model and onto the specific machine, the aircraft that crashed near Nancy. Every plane has its own biography. The machine that crashed was a Pilatus PC-6/B2H4 turbo porter with the registration D-FIPS. The letter D at the start means a German registration. On paper, the aircraft was registered to Germany, even though it flew with a French skydiving club. Its story goes back to the early 90s. The plane was built in March of 1991, serial number 874. By the time of the crash, the machine was about 35 years old. To an outsider, that sounds alarming. The plane was older than most of its passengers. But in aviation, the age of an airframe is not by itself a death sentence. The PC-6 was designed with a huge margin of strength, and with proper maintenance, machines like this fly for decades, going through major overhauls and component replacements. According to the investigation, the registered owners were the company's Classic Wings and the related KIAS Airlines, while the aircraft was handed over for operation to the Tandemotion Parachutism Club, based at Nancy, SE. It was this club that was running the introductory jumps on that fateful day. The aircraft's work schedule had been packed, and that's clear from simple statistics. On Saturday alone, the plane logged 15 lifts with skydivers, and the next morning it added 5 more to that. The 6th flight was the one that ended in disaster, and each of those lifts is a full working cycle with a full cabin and an energetic climb under load. 20 cycles in a day and a half is a serious test for the engine, for the airframe, and for the pilot. Whether the aircraft's age or the intensity of its use played any role at all in the crash is still unknown. The answer has to come from the investigation, and that's only just beginning. And the first word in it was spoken not by an investigator but by a government official. In the very first hours after the crash, the public is given the most cautious explanation possible. The prefect of the Meurthe-Moselle department, the state's senior representative in that territory, says that according to preliminary information, a malfunction may have occurred on board that brought the flight to an end. The wording is short and deliberately restrained. The prefect doesn't say what exactly failed, not a word about the engine, about the controls, about any specific component. And that's the right call. In those first hours, the authorities simply don't have the data to claim anything definite. The word malfunction here isn't a conclusion. It's an honest admission that the machine stopped behaving normally. The nature of the failure at this stage has not officially been established. To establish it for real, the professionals step in. The investigation is handed to the BEA, France's Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis for Civil Aviation Safety. It's an independent state body that deals specifically with the technical side. It doesn't look for someone to blame. It answers the question of what happened and why. The BEA has investigated the biggest crashes in French aviation and carries international authority. To the site near Nancy, the Bureau sends a team, by available accounts, 4 investigators and a first information officer, who gathers operational details right after the event. Alongside the technical side, the judicial one is working too. The criminal case is led by the Paris prosecutor's office, while the actual investigative steps are entrusted to the Air Transport Gendarmerie, a unit that specializes in aviation incidents. So a double chain of command takes shape. Some are looking for the technical cause, others for someone's possible responsibility. But both lines run into the very same first question: what is hidden behind the word malfunction? And it's around the answer to that question that the first theories start to form. The first thing that catches the specialist's attention is simple arithmetic. The specific variant of the plane that crashed, the PC-6/B2H4 in the club's skydiving configuration, is certified for 10 people, 1 pilot and 9 skydivers. That's the limit written into the aircraft's documents. And on that fatal flight, there were 11 on board. The pilot, 5 instructors, and 5 students. 1 more person than the certification allows. That number immediately lands in the investigation's sights as a possible factor in the crash. Why is 1 extra person such a big deal? Here you need 2 ideas: weight and balance. Weight is the total mass of the machine. The heavier it is, the longer the takeoff roll and the worse the plane climbs. The balance, or center of gravity, is where the weight is positioned. If the load is shifted aft or distributed poorly, the machine becomes hard to control, especially at low speed right after takeoff. And skydivers aren't strapped into seats. During the roll and the climb, they can easily slide back toward the door, and the center of gravity creeps even further aft. 1 extra person on board means extra weight and the risk of an unfavorable center of gravity, and it strikes right where everything went wrong in the first seconds of the climb. The machine is already struggling to haul itself up with a full cabin, and now its margin of safety melts away even faster. I'll be straight with you. As of now, this is only an investigative theory, not an established fact. The overload may have been 1 link in the chain, or it may not have played a decisive role at all. To answer precisely, the BEA has to painstakingly reconstruct exactly how much the plane weighed at the moment of takeoff and how the load was distributed. And right alongside the weight stands another factor that day, invisible but treacherous. Let's come back to the weather. That heat, the one the region had been sitting under for 3 days straight, looks from the outside like just a backdrop to the tragedy. For a light aircraft, it can be a direct threat. Here, a piece of physics is at work that pilots know by heart. The hotter the air, the thinner it is, the molecules spread apart, and the density drops. In aviation, this is described by the concept of density altitude. In the heat, the plane feels as if it has climbed far higher above sea level than it actually has. The airfield near Nancy sits at a low elevation, but in 40-degree heat, the air over that runway behaves like the air somewhere high in the mountains. The consequences for the machine are threefold. The engine puts out less power in thin air because it doesn't have enough dense oxygen. The propeller gets less of a grip on the thin air. The wing generates less lift. All of it strikes at the most important characteristics of a takeoff. By the specialists' estimates, in conditions like these, the plane's takeoff roll can stretch by roughly a third, while its ability to climb can drop noticeably. And it strikes at exactly the stretch of flight where D-FIPS came apart. The machine was already climbing with difficulty, and the scorching air seemed to lower an invisible ceiling over the runway. Now put it all together. An old, heavily worked aircraft, a possible extra person, and a shifted center of gravity, and on top of everything, that scorching air. Each of these circumstances, the machine could most likely have survived on its own. The tragedy is that on that Sunday, they all came together at once. Which one of them pulled the trigger and which only made things worse will have to be figured out by the people piecing this picture together fragment by fragment. To understand how much of a pattern this disaster is, it's worth looking back. The crash near Nancy is not the first of its kind. Skydiving aviation has its own history of losses, one the wider public knows little about, and the turboporters hold a grim place in it. The closest parallel is Belgium, October of 2013. Near the town of Fernelmont, a Pilatus PC-6 exactly like this one, with 10 skydivers and a pilot on board, lost altitude shortly after climbing and crashed to the ground. All 11 died. The same number of victims, the same type of machine, death in the early phase of flight, a dark echo of what would repeat near Nancy 13 years later. But history knows other outcomes too. In May of 2008 in Spain near Lillo, a similar porter had a wing fold up in mid-flight. The machine was doomed, but 9 skydivers managed to jump and save themselves under their canopies. 2 died, the pilot and 1 jumper. And in the summer of 2016 in Portugal near Beja, a PC-6 literally broke apart in the air at altitude, and all 7 skydivers managed to deploy and survive, 2 with serious injuries. The only one killed was the pilot, who stayed in the cockpit to the end. These stories all share one thing. When the failure happens high up, the skydivers have a chance, saved by the very thing they climbed into the sky for, the canopy on their backs. But when disaster strikes on takeoff, just a few meters above the ground, there's nowhere and no time left to jump. Every one of these cases ended the same way, with an investigation searching for the cause. And so it will be near Nancy. And here we have to be completely honest. Everything we've talked about so far, a mechanical failure, an overload, the center of gravity, the heat, a stall in a turn, these are theories, working hypotheses. None of them has been confirmed yet. As of today, there is no official answer near Nancy. The BEA is only just getting its work underway. The work ahead is long and painstaking. The investigators will study every fragment of the wreckage, take apart the engine and the propeller, check whether the engine was producing thrust at the moment of the fall. They'll pull up the aircraft's maintenance records, its flight logbook, its repair history. They'll reconstruct the exact loading and center of gravity, how much each person weighed, how everyone was positioned in the cabin where the center of gravity was. There's a serious difficulty too. A light jump plane is not an airliner. As a rule, it doesn't carry the famous black boxes, the flight recorders that on big machines capture every second of a flight and every word in the cockpit. So the investigation has less data to work with. The course of the flight will have to be reconstructed from radar tracks, from eyewitness accounts, from phone videos, from the wreckage itself, and from the marks on the ground. The BEA's preliminary report usually comes out earlier than the final one, but even that takes weeks and months. The final conclusions in cases like this are prepared over years. So as you listen to the news from near Nancy, keep one simple thing in mind. The real answer will come only from the Bureau and not tomorrow. For now, what remains is what's known for certain. On a clear, hot Sunday near Nancy, 11 people climbed into the sky for a few minutes of joy and free flight and never came back. The pilot, 5 instructors, 5 students. Why this particular takeoff, the 6th that day and a routine one, became the last is still to be discovered. And the answer matters not out of curiosity, but so that something like this never happens again.